we had nice continuation to the pullback thesis last week and actually had a very red weekly close on the S&P 500. And you can see right here, we are within that red box that previously was a supply zone from all the way back here before we had that cup and handle breakout. If you remember that video from back around this time, we had that cup over here, the handle, and then the breakout to above this key supply zone. And it's actually acted as a demand zone once it was retested along with my critical range, roughly 4,475 to 4,485, which has acted as a nice support so far, just based on Thursday's price action, and is also where we closed on Friday. So something that I'm watching for this week is to see if SPX stays contained within this red range. The next target would be 4,450. That'd be my first main target that I like to see before some form of a major rebound, because typically whenever you see these downtrends in the overall market, especially for the S&P 500 as well as QQQ, you will see these small short covering rallies that are very brief, and that's why I consider it to be small, but they are very powerful at the same time. You can see 2, 3, 4, and even 5-day rallies to the upside. They're basically pops in price before the downtrend continues after, and they're not fun to hold shorts through, especially because of how aggressive they are to the upside in a very short amount of time. So that's something that I'm watching for and potentially can start as early as this week. So I do not want to hold a lot of my downside exposure through one of those events. So that's why I'm watching this week for key levels like 4,450, or even if it starts earlier on the week for a breach back above 4,500, so that I can be aware and position myself correctly for one of those pops. Because again, whenever you see these downtrends emerge, there will be some of those pops along the way. And typically the first pop is the strongest, just based on history, at least throughout what we saw in 2022 and early 2023. But this is something that I'm watching for this week. This range is going to be key. If it's able to break above the range, especially with an hourly candle confirmation, then we can see a lot more upside after, at least to 4,525. And then over that would confirm a lot more upside back to this supply zone over here. But at the moment, it is still contained within this box. So the target still remains at 4,450 at the moment. But also looking over here, something interesting is the VIX chart. And I'll actually go over to the daily just to show you here. We do have this key trend line, which I've shared in a previous video. We are just about at this trend line, and that means that there will be some form of a minor pullback, or that at least there should be some form of a minor pullback in the VIX, which means that there likely would be some form of a pop in the S&P 500, because typically they are inversely correlated. Remember, this is a hard resistance, so when it is touched initially, at least for that first attempt, I am expecting there to be some form of rejection, and then afterwards it can attempt to break back above. And also this level is very critical, 1760, because if we're able to break above, then it leaves a lot more room for more volatility, at least up until this 20/21 area, because that's the next key supply zone. So something to watch for, especially if it does break between August and September. But at the moment, I am watching this specific level of 1760 because I expect there to be some form of a pullback there in terms of volatility, which of course can lead to a pop in the market. I would like to see it happen after 4,450s hit this week, but we'll just have to play with the cards we're dealt. We'll continue to watch both volatility as well as this range in the S&P 500, especially with that confirmation above 4,500, to get a better idea on where price will go. Just remember, we are in a downtrend at the moment that I do expect will be able to go sub 4,400 at some point between August and September of this year. So I am watching for that. But again, like I said earlier, there can be some pops on the way down, some little short covering rallies that are brief, but can be very aggressive when they are occurring. So it's just something to watch for, and they can pose as great trade opportunities or an opportunity to reduce your overall exposure if you are short. So that's something that I'm just watching for, and I expect there will be a potential entry this week for one of those, whether it's early in the week or end of the week. We'll have to see just based on price, but it's basically just something to watch for. Now, another thing I do want to talk about is QQQ. We saw that key breakdown of this trend line, which I mentioned before. This blue one is the one that goes all the way back down to the beginning of the summer, and it's basically been the upward trend that tech has been trading within this entire summer period. And we broke down below it based on Wednesday's price action after that large gap down, and it's been able to stay not only below that trend line, but also below 376, which was a key support level all the the way back here, that third week of July. You can see acted as a nice support and also was able to bounce off of it just a bit to my supply zone up here, which we were able to sell off from. And as long as we stay below 376 going forward, the bias is overwhelmingly bearish. So keep that in mind. Retests up here can definitely occur. We had a mini fake out over here where it attempted to get back above, but as long as it stays below this level, then there's a lot more downside to come for QQQ. Of course, there can still be pops in the market, like I just shared earlier, for the S&P 500, and that typically means QQQ will follow to some extent. But again, as long as we stay below this level, there will be a lot more downside to come. And also with that, I do want to mention Apple, because of course Apple is the largest holding in the NASDAQ as well as the S&P 500, but we've seen a substantial sell-off in Apple so far. It actually was able to break below this key dark pool print I mentioned in a video over a week ago, this 191.94 level. It actually closed right below it before that earnings came out, and we saw a lot more downside afterwards, but at the moment is getting very oversold, which can lead to a pop later on this week. So that's something that I'm watching for. Of course, if Apple does see that pop, then that can lead the rest of the market to do that as well. One of the levels that I'm watching is 182.60. This is derived from back here. We had our first support over here, roughly 182.60. This also worked nicely because it was just a wick below that, as well as both of these mini ones on the hourly. This also was the opening level of this large gap up. I like to use gap up and gap down levels, at least the opening price, as support and resistance levels. Sometimes works a little bit better on the indexes, but nevertheless works well here. So I am watching this level. If we do get a break above early on this week, we can see a lot more upside to about 186, 187 on the low end. But at the moment, we still are within that downward trend, similar to QQQ as well as the S&P 500 in the medium term between August and September. Of course, there can still be pops along the way. As I've reiterated a lot of times during this video now, watch Apple. This will likely lead the market, especially if it's at that level where it's just super oversold. It could just bounce a lot higher. Also, here's a quick look at the RSI, Relative Strength Index indicator. We're at a 15 level on the 1 hour chart for the RSI on Apple, which it's been a very long time since it was sub 20 at the very least, as you can see over here. So characteristically hasn't been the case, at least for the upward trend that we saw in Apple, to see 15. That also means that there's probably a large change in trend for Apple. So we are within that downward trend. But again, you're going to see pops along the way to the downside. Whenever it gets super oversold like this, it is due for one of those to happen. And you just have to position correctly, because when Apple moves up, especially in an aggressive fashion, you're going to see the market follow to some degree. So just something to keep in mind. And lastly, a quick dark pool update on SPY. We saw a lot of premium to end the week. I shared Monday, Tuesday, I believe Wednesday's dark pool prints on that Wednesday video we did a couple days ago, but I want to share between Wednesday and Friday what we saw, because they get very interesting near the end of the week. We saw that 3.6 billion one at 456.43 based on Wednesday's price action. If you actually scroll down a lot farther here, you can start to see some much larger prints. We saw 3.9 over here, also added with a 2 billion one. So we had about 6 billion worth of premium at that 450 low level. So 450, a lot of interest here, and actually an even smaller one for 1.3 billion. So about 7 billion worth of premium at that 450 level. Definitely want to mark this mini range on your chart, roughly a couple cent range here on SPY, because this will be interesting if we do get that pop this week. If price is able to reclaim this level, we can see a lot more upside after that, like to 452, 453 on SPY. Otherwise, it's going to act as a hard resistance range when it is initially tested for this week. But if I go down a lot farther, you can see here $5.6 billion at the 449.03 level. So that's a very unusual amount of premium to see in terms of a signature dark pool print. Super rare to see over 5 billion in premium. And also the 3 billion ones are rare in itself too. But just again, over 5 billion is super rare to see. So 449.03 is definitely going to be a level to watch for this week. We closed below it on Friday, but if we do get that pop here, we're going to watch this level as well as that 450 range that I just showed you, because this is going to be a telltale sign if the market wants to pop a lot higher, or if it's going to reject off of one of these levels. Because whenever you see a lot of premium, especially accumulating around a certain level, then they tend to act as key support and resistance levels when they are initially touched soon after. So this is something to watch for probably as soon as early this week once it's retested. But a lot of premium throughout the week, and you can see some of the smaller prints as we went down. There's actually quite a bit, as you can see over here. And I'll filter. One of the beautiful things about the new update on Cheddar Flow is you can filter for dark pool premium. You can see over here at 500 million plus. If I filter for that, we saw only 3 prints above 500 million for the day, and they all were for SPY. These are individual prints. These are not signature dark pool prints. These are individual dark pool prints. And you can see here 666 million, 825 million, and 737 million. All of these occurred, as you can see over here, just based on the timestamp, after hours on Friday. These are probably buys because we did end the week down quite a bit. Doesn't have to be. We could see a large gap down on Monday, but just because we've seen a lot of downside based on last week, and that's uncharacteristic for the price action this summer, these are likely buys. So this 446-ish level around here is probably going to act as some form of a support. And typically whenever you see these large prints near the end of the day, and a lot of them around the same range, you tend to have a large gap in either direction. In this case, it's probably going to be some form of a gap up, but we'll have to see just based on Monday. Keep this in mind though, because there's potential buying around this high 446 level. But other than that, as always, appreciate you guys watching this video, and I'll see you guys next time on Wednesday.